This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to part 1.
First, you have some time to read questions 1 to 5. Now listen to the conversation and answer questions 1 to 5. Well, Claudia, our first semester at university is almost over. I can't wait for the holidays.
Oh, me too. Why don't we go somewhere far away and forget about lectures and essays and all that hard work?
Sounds good to me. How about if we go to the coast? It would be great to do some swimming and surfing.
The coast would be good, but let's look at our other options. There are the mountains. They're nice and cool at this time of year. There's also the desert, which I really enjoyed last year.
What about going to Sydney? I've never been there, and they say it's a great city to visit.
Well, I agree. Sydney would be good, but there are too many tourists there at this time of year, and I'd rather get away from buildings and cars. I vote for the mountains.
All right, then, let's do that. Now, we have to decide where we're going to stay and how we're going to get there. Any suggestions?
Well, for places to stay, there are the usual places, motels, hotels and youth hostels. We can go camping too.
I'm afraid I'm not a very good camper. I tend to feel a bit frightened sleeping outdoors.
All right, we'll forget about camping. So, what do you prefer?
Well, since neither of us has a lot of money, I don't think a hotel or motel would be possible. How about a youth hostel?
Oh, I'd rather not go to a youth hostel. They're cramped and noisy, and the person in the bed next to you might be a snorer. No, I think we should find a small holiday house to rent, and if we get a few more friends to join us, it will be really cheap.
Okay. You know, it's the first time for me to travel to the mountains. What do you suggest to take? Mosquito net, I guess.
Mosquito net is useful, but I don't want to add more weight to our luggage. So the insect repellent can do, I think. Besides, aspirins are necessary and some cold cure, in case we feel sick or something like this.
Do you think we need binoculars and a camera?
Well, it would be a good idea to take binoculars. As to a camera, I'm not very for it. I'd rather record the scenes in my mind.
You're right. What about the money? How much do you think is enough and how we should take it?
I've learned from a friend about the cost. He told me that they spent about $480 for 1 week's tour, so I think $500 would be enough. We may need over $300 for the house. Have you got any traveller's checks?
No, I haven't, but I've got a credit card and a saving card.
Then take the credit cards with us. It would be more convenient to pay the house fees with a credit card.
Before the rest of the conversation, you have some time to read questions 6 to 10. Now listen carefully to the rest of the conversation and answer questions 6 to 10. Oh, I nearly forgot the date. How long will we have before we have to be back here on campus?
Under a week, I think. We'll leave on the 14th of April and come back on the 21st, because you know we'll start to study on the 22nd.
Do you know the definite locations of some holiday houses? I suppose it would be nice if we book in advance.
Yes. Look at this brochure here. It says that there are several holiday houses near the mountains. I prefer the one near the woods. It's situated right across the road from the rainforest park.
That sounds good. We can easily go to the rainforest park then. Do you know what else we can do there besides visiting the park?
I know that many people go there for bushwalking, but you need a good pair of walking boots, of course.
Are there any dangers in the bushes? I'm a little frightened.
In fact, there's no need to be nervous of the bushes, provided that you treat it with respect and common sense. Most of the animals and wildlife are gentle and harmless. There are venomous snakes to be aware of, but really they're much more frightened of you than you are of them. The other thing is that certain plants can cause irritation if you touch them with bare skin.
I see. Well, I can't wait for the coming holiday.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
You will hear a media studies tutor giving a lecture about news sources.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Okay, now many of you will have heard about the predicted death of newspapers, as people increasingly access the TV and the Internet for their news. Today, I want to look at the USA, which has very advanced news sources, to see if this is actually true. In the USA, the main news sources without doubt are TV, the Internet, and the press. That is, traditional newspapers. And although they are each surviving and growing, they are also changing. Obviously, TV news has been around for a while, and the early evening bulletins when people get in from work are very popular. I suppose we traditionally think of the morning newspaper arriving on our doorstep with the daily news. Interestingly, this is not borne out by the statistics, which show that readership in the U.S. is much higher when people have time to relax, when they're not working, especially on Sundays. The Internet is also a popular weekend activity, but shows no variation with weekday access. So people are using the different sources in different ways. Interestingly, local radio has been hit less by the grip of quite strong local newspapers than by the Internet, which is seen to offer a better regional service. But just because the Internet is seen as the new force in news media does not mean it is dominant. Television has, of course, been global for a while. But now technological changes, which have fueled the rise of online news, have also allowed newspapers to print and distribute editions across the world. In fact, Internet news, which is seen as the big competitor for traditional markets, does not offer that much variety. Often, the sources are the online versions of the newspapers, whereas television, in order to offer something different, has had to come up with a much more mixed bag of reporting, from hard news to light reports on celebrity events. Another issue is reliability. The Internet is virtually unregulated, so anything can be reported there, whether true or not. Journalists on newspapers have fought a long, hard battle to fight intervention and to retain the freedom of the press. Television, however, is seen as critical to political power and has become subject to harsh controls about what it can or cannot say.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now, one very critical factor in keeping newspapers alive and well in the USA has been their approach to advertising. Obviously, newspapers are heavily dependent on advertising revenue, and they have become more and more imaginative in what they offer, in order to make sure that advertisers use them and not other news sources. This has meant that, contrary to popular belief, newspapers now have a significantly higher profit margin than the rest of American industry. So, how have they managed to raise advertising revenue in this way? Well, they have put a lot of effort into developing and maintaining a very strong association with the retail trade. And they've come up with a winner. A critical tool in their sales plan has been suggesting that the adverts they run can have vouchers. This has been enormously effective because they have found that not only do more people buy the paper to get the discounts, but also that this inevitably means much higher sales for the clients who advertised. As well as doing this, the newspapers have also introduced aggressive sales campaigns over the last few years. This has resulted in a significant and continuing rise in the number of advertisers prepared to pay the extra for full-page ads. So, what I would like to move on to...
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3. We'll hear a discussion between a tutor, Dr. Lester, and two students, Greg and Alexandra, at the end of a talk about music. In the first part of the discussion, they are talking about some of the students' favourite instruments and favourite styles of music. Complete the table showing the students' opinions. Choose your answers from the box. There are more words than spaces, so you will not use them all. You may use any of the words more than once.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
I think it's time we looked at the results of our survey. What did you find out, Alexandra?
We're a group with very diverse tastes, Dr. Lester.
I'm not surprised. What were the favourite instruments?
Well, Greg loves drums. He told me he played drums when he was at primary school, and now he plays drums with his friends at weekends. They have a band.
Good. What do you like to play, Alexandra?
My favourite is the guitar. However, I haven't played for years, so I keep hoping to start again. Will I go on with the others?
Yes, please.
Katya is like Greg. She loves to listen to drums. She says she's not a player, just a listener. Rachel, as you know, is a violinist, so of course it's natural that she should favour the violin.
So we have two people who love the sound of the drum and two who like strings. The violin for Rachel and the guitar for Alex. What does Harry like?
Harry says the best instrument of them all is the piano. He claims it's more versatile than any other instrument. Emiko plays the piano, but her favourite instrument is the flute.
The flute?
Yes, Emiko plays the flute too, of course.
Thank you, Alexandra. Greg, will you tell us the students' favourite style of music?
We're really very conservative. My favourite is classical music, and that's Alexandra's choice too. Katja claims to like rock.
So that's a vote from Greg, Alexandra and Katja. Doesn't Rachel prefer classical music?
Rachel made a choice which surprised me. She plays the violin, so I expected classical or opera. But Rachel says that she prefers country music.
How interesting. What's Harry's choice?
Harry likes to listen to opera and loves to go to see a performance. He says opera has everything, colour and spectacle and theatre and great music.
And Emiko?
Emiko says jazz is her favourite music. She goes to listen to jazz every Friday evening. She also likes opera, heavy metal, classical, but jazz is the best.
Thank you, Greg. I wanted to see what you all liked so I could understand your musical tastes more. And I want to move from this to a discussion of the physiological effects of music.
In the second part of the discussion, Dr. Lester will talk about the way music affects our bodies.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to divide music roughly into two types: music which stimulates us and music which calms us. It seems that music which stimulates us gives rise to actual changes in our bodies. We listen to exciting music and our hearts beat faster, our blood pressure rises, and our blood flows more quickly. In short, we're stimulated. Soothing music, however, has the opposite effect. We relax and let the world go by. Our heart beats more gently, our blood pressure drops, and we feel calm. Alexandra, can you think of things which help us to relax?
Gentle rhythms?
Yes, in part. The melodies which help us to relax are smooth-flowing and often have repeated rhythms. These rhythms are constant and dynamic, a little like the crash of the sea on the beach. Their very predictability is sedating, relaxing. By contrast, very loud, discordant music with unpredictable rhythms and structures excites and stimulates us. These two generalizations about the differences between music which stimulates and music which soothes are true as far as they go, but they are far from conclusive. We still have a lot of research to do to find out what, for instance, people of different cultures hear and feel when they listen to music. This department is taking part in a continuing study on the influence of culture on musical perception, and we'll talk about that more next week.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4.
You'll hear an interview on IQ tests.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Mrs. Kellerman, a specialist in child psychology, is interviewed by Bridget.
Mrs. Kellerman, why is it that some children perform much better than others at school? Obviously, it can't be denied that certain children are brighter than others, but it's not as simple as that. A lot of emphasis is placed on intelligence measured by tests, so-called IQ tests, which only measure certain types of intelligence, such as basically linguistic and numerical skills, or reading and mathematics to put it plainly, which is unfortunate because some children are bound to suffer. A good example was a friend of mine's son who was kept out of the top class at school because of his average IQ. That's around 100. His father, though he had no idea his son was going to be an architect, always said he was a clever child. Apparently, he was able to picture things in his mind and draw accurately at a very early age. The point is that his university life might not have been so difficult if his ability had been recognized sooner. What you're saying, then, is that some children have abilities that are not easy to measure, that aren't appreciated by many schools. Precisely. And if these schools are not spotted sufficiently early, they cannot be developed. That's why, in my view, there are so many unhappy adults in the world. They are not doing the things they are best at. What are those other kinds of intelligence? How can we recognize them in our children? Well, take musical talent. Many children never get the chance to learn to play an instrument, but while they might not become great artists or composers, they may get a lot of pleasure and satisfaction. Musically gifted children are fascinated by all kinds of sounds, car horns, animal noises, and so on, and they can easily recognize tunes and sing them in key. How can a parent encourage them? Sing to them and teach them new songs. Buy a piano or even a cheap instrument such as a recorder. If you can afford it, send them to music lessons as soon as possible. Play recordings of different instruments to them. What about a child who is good at sport? Could that be described as a form of intelligence? Most certainly. We psychologists call it motor or bodily intelligence. These children move gracefully and handle objects skillfully. A child who finds it easy to take things apart and use various tools may well become an engineer with the right encouragement. We should give them models to make and take them to science museums. However, unless these children are also good with words and numbers, they will probably not do well in school examinations. Is there anything a parent can do to help in this case? Yes, it may be worth spending money on private lessons, but, hardly anyone is good at everything. In my opinion, a child should be judged on his individual talents. After all, being happy in life is putting your skills to good use, no matter what they are.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
I feel nauseous, believe me. Never had a lot of shit come easy. Had to work hard, struggle just to be me. Had to rise up just so they could see me. Did what I had to do just to feed me. And what was left over I put towards my dreaming. But the only thing in life that has meaning are the things you gotta work for, believe me. Take into your hands a plan. Your own hands can land your own brand. And damn, I feel like no one takes accountability. They want the credibility,